in many ways, I am obviously, like all of us, a great fan. And I want to just stop for a moment and just pay homage to the one great man who's brought all of us who are watching on and all of us who are in this forum together. And that is Professor Roy Basker, a man for whom I've had developed a sense of great love and for his work and for him as a man and as a decent human being. I remember very fondly Roy coming to visit me when I was the principal of, or the headmaster at a school called Cherbourg, which was an Aboriginal community school. I'll come back to that point, but at least let me linger on Roy and the great man he is and was, and the contributions that he's made. As a consequence of your presentation, Priscilla, I just want to flip the order of which I talked about it. A couple of days ago, I was in Brisbane, Australia, and I went to a seminar of a leading economist who was talking very much about human services policy reform. And what was really interesting, and I couldn't help wondering if Roy had been in the room with me, I probably know what he would have said. So he gave a very technical response to what is clearly a complex policy area. And he talked about the need for clear objectives for human service policy to be effective. It's got to have clear objectives. It's got to have good design. It's got to be have good implementation, and there's got to be measurement and evaluation. And I thought, yeah, this is a really technical conversation to what is a complex circumstance. And it occurred to me, as I'm sure it would have occurred to Roy, is that here we were as bureaucrats having a conversation about human services policy, and not kind of almost oblivious to the fact that we were talking about it in a technical sense, but it was human services policy that was disconnected to any conversation about humanity. And I think that's the complexity, and that's what I think in the model that has been outlined. Priscilla talked about notions of ontological depth, and that is, I think, the thing that certainly emancipated my thinking from Roy's work and helped me in a whole lot of ways. Just as a quick example, if I reflect on the work that I had that we did at Cherbourg State School, an all Aboriginal community school, I was the principal there I started in 1998. I left there in 2004, and we had tremendous success in that school because we believed in the humanity of those children and their capacity to be exceptional. And people thought I was crazy at the time, and sometimes I thought I was crazy because nobody was thinking like that. But I think it was because of some very personal experiences that I'd had that I won't go into now as an Aboriginal man and an Aboriginal student. But I knew that we could rise above. If we surrounded children with greater expectations, then we would start to see more of them. So and see more of them we did. The school became nationally acclaimed. Real attendance at school went from 62% to 94%. Literacy and numeracy results surged, and we didn't ever threaten to whack people around with a big stick to force those outcomes. We just created a school that said to children and said to community, hey, we love you and we believe in you and we want the best for you. So what's going on there from a kind of critical realist perspective? There's a whole lot of things, and Priscilla, you referred to these. There is the notion of the empirical or what experienced, and it's basically a lot of people were colluding with low expectations and seemed to be just accepting that Indigenous children didn't succeed at school. And that kind of fed into a sort of actuality, because the kids and the parents ended up colluding with that circumstance because nobody had given them a reason to think or believe or feel differently about them. Yet underpinning all of that was what Roy would refer to as the reality or the real, and that is that notion of potential or that sense of agency. And I think in our work, we just had to tap into that sense of agency and get children to see that in themselves and get parents to see that in themselves and their own children. And when we did that and we embraced school and learning in that way, that's how change occurred. And I'm going to say, I'm forever grateful to Roy's legacy, and I've used that kind of thinking, you know. So when I go to a lecture about human services policy reform or whatever, and in my current role as Director General of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs in the state of Queensland, I use this kind of philosophical approach to anchor all of the work. And that is, you know, from my perspective, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a perspective that's shared, but I'm seeking to influence as much as I can, and we're getting there. That is that human policy should be about enabling agency, acknowledging and embracing and unleashing a sense of human agency and human potential, rather than feeling like we need to push this button to get this outcome, because there is such ontological depth and such complexity to all of these sorts of challenges that it's impossible to think of it in any other way, I think. Let me round things up just quickly with another example that I've made good use of, and I think this has applications all around the world. You heard in the introduction, I was described of Italian and Aboriginal descent, and I watch with some dismay as young people get a sense of confusion, or policymakers get confused, or the redneck nut jobs in the country sort of say, well, you're Australian, or you're not Aboriginal, you're Australian, and try to force me to be something that they want me to be. And I watch young children with mixed race struggle with this, because they want to be Aboriginal, but there's much confusion until we embrace the notion of Roy's concrete universal, you know, because until I understood that, I didn't understand, and I've worked with a lot of young people right across Australia to get them to understand that we are all of those things, you know, that there is ontological depth to who we are, and the concrete universal will let us understand that. And so simply and quickly, in Roy's example, he says, at our core, we're all human, and there are layers or mediations upon our core humanity, and that those mediations will resonate differently according to time and place or context. So for me, at my core, I'm human, and at that level, all of us are the same, but there are layers upon my core humanity that are different to yours, and they will mediate differently. So, you know, you heard that I have Italian origins. So you might say, well, are you Australian, or are you Italian, or are you Aboriginal? Well, I'm all of those things. It just depends on what's happening at the time. Let me explain really quickly. So my father was born in Miglianico, and he had a wife and 3 children there. He left Australia to come out to, he left Miglianico in Italy to come out here to Australia after the Second World War. He got with my mum. That relationship in Italy fell down. He got with my mum, and he had 10 children out here. I'm the youngest. So my father was a very fertile man. Well, what am I saying? I have a brother and 2 sisters in Italy. And so when I'm in Italy, in Miglianico, and I'm speaking Italian to them because they don't speak English, well, in that moment, because of where I am and because of what I'm doing, that layer, or that my sense of being Italian, is resonating very strongly. And so in that moment, I'm Italian, and I'm fiercely proud of that. It doesn't mean that I've stopped being Aboriginal. It just means that layer is not resonating as strongly. But when I'm home here in my home country of Bundaberg, I'm fishing in the Burnett River, and I'm thinking, wow, my ancestors have fished in this river for many thousands of years. Or when I do my work as the head of the Aboriginal Affairs Department, my sense of being Aboriginal resonates more strongly. It doesn't mean that I've stopped being Italian. It just means that my sense of being Italian isn't resonating as my sense of being Aboriginal. And it's interesting to note then, embracing all of this complexity, that at some levels we're different, but there's a level at which we're the same. So what does that mean, just quickly, in a policy context? It means that I think when we decide on what outcomes are good enough for a particular group or minority group or something, we've got to get to the core humanity, and at that level decide what outcomes are good enough, rather than make stifled decisions based on a contaminated insight of the layer of cultural identity or sense of being marginalised or disabilities or whatever. They're just layers, and we can't make good policy decisions that are detached from decisions about the core humanity. I'm going to just, I think I'll leave it at that, and just Roy's final commentary was around And we talked a lot about this and on his visit to Cherbourg and in the time we spent together, about his notion of re-enchanting the world and being led by Indigenous schools of thoughts that have sustained us for many thousands and thousands of years. And as I speak to you on this platform, I know that in lots of parts of Australia we're under threat of bushfires all over the place. And I just think, man, if we had the wisdom to embrace Roy's notions of re-enchanting the world and understanding the value of Indigenous schools of thoughts, maybe we would not be so threatened by notions of climate change in the way that we are today. So I leave you with those thoughts, and I look forward to further conversation.
And Chris, you were talking about the importance of expectation, and in a way that wonderful phrase within critical realism of absenting and absence. That there seems to me a kind of segue, a link there in absenting the absence of expectation amongst Indigenous students. Do you want to say a little bit more about that and link it with what Priscilla's just said?
Yeah, and I think, I think in part that's fueled by a misguided sense of what is the empirical or what has become actual. And so what happens then is we become oblivious to what is real and that sort of the potential, because we get tricked into such a narrow view. And I find that with this kind of the more recent sort of, well, not that recent, but that neoliberal thinking of trying to just imagine that if we do this, then we'll get that outcome, as if it's that simplistic. And of course, it's never that. It's never that simplistic, particularly in the area of policy that is about creating a change in human condition. So there's the sort of inability to get below the actuality and the empirical, and to entertain a sense of what's real and what is the potential, what is that sense of agency. You know, it's often contaminated or stifled by a sense of ignorance, a sense of sometimes racism, all of the things we've talked about earlier. But I think if we could embrace Roy's theories of ontological depth, it may well it at least puts out some markers about where we need to get to furnish our thinking, to transcend the sort of stifled views or transcend elements of racist views and ignorance. So I think it provides a framework for which we can transcend these kind of challenges and frustrations that we're stuck in.
How then does language affect this as well? Because I'm very mindful of what you're talking about, you know, humanity, human beings, enchantment, but then also much of the language of critical realism for some sort of critics or people coming new to critical realism, it is kind of clunky, for want of a better word, like mechanisms, structures. You know, these are words which imply that you do have a kind of way of moving from a kind of a mechanistic approach, which is not at all what Roy was talking about, not at all what critical realism engages with. Do you find that people are struggle with the language, or do you not use the language? Do you use a different language?
Yeah, I do find that people struggle with the language, and one of the things that makes it difficult, and it's kind of related to your question about language, is the sort of is the media and the really quick forms of media that fuel these sort of fast-thinking sorts of expectations and fast-thinking kind of ignorance. And the more that happens, the more we're unable to get a deeper insight into what is real and the potential that human agency exists. So, for instance, here in Australia, if we talk about Aboriginal people in the group, for a long time we've designed policy as if every Aboriginal person is at the far left-hand side of the bell curve, when in fact that's not the truth, you know. And it's that kind of, you know, it's that sort of ignorance, or that people are stuck in what they perceive to be the actuality or their sense of empirical presence, that it stops them from getting into the deeper, more complex senses of what's actually real and what could be real.
For all of you, I just wondered if we could step back just a moment, and if I could ask you, how did you find yourself going to critical realism in the first place? If you can give us some thoughts on that, because I know that for many people, they don't even get to critical realism, and if they do, it's kind of through circuitous routes. I'm just wondering how you yourselves found your way to critical realism in the first place.
For me, I was writing my PhD at the time, and an old, it's getting very old now, a mentor and very dear friend of mine who still works with me, Dr. Gary McLennan, had brought me to critical realist thinking. Because I was working at the school, I was writing my PhD at the same time, and I suppose it's fair to say I had, like a lot of us, I had my own things going on and trying to find I had a concern about young people and watching them struggle with their sense of identity, and watching young Aboriginal children collude with what they thought was a cultural identity, when in fact it wasn't. It was just a negative stereotype that was being held out for them, and they were colluding with that, kind of thinking that they were reinforcing their sense of cultural identity. And so through my insights and understandings about critical realism, I was able to frame up my own thinking to transcend that for myself. I talked earlier about the complexities of being Aboriginal, Italian, being Australian, and not understanding that I could be all of those things and just be okay about that. But also in my work with the kids at Sherbrooke School, getting them to understand that their sense of identity is complex. It's not just one thing, and it's definitely not this negative stereotype that's being held out to you by the rest of society. So let's stop getting tricked into colluding with that, thinking that that's our cultural identity, and let's understand that for what it is, and that it's a negative stereotype, and that's all it is. And let's get to the sense of, okay, when we think about our sense of being Aboriginal, what is real? And that's where we've driven to that sort of deeper insights about a more authentic sense of being Aboriginal and what that actually meant. And really that was the basis of my thesis, was separating those two perceptions of identity and getting down into the deeper and understanding what was real. And Roy's philosophical approach was just, as I said, was emancipatory for my own thinking.